Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the pre-submittal conference for the supportive services for permanent supportive housing for transition-aged youth and families, RFP, that's being offered by the Department of Family and Support Services. My name is Maura McCauley with the Homeless Division at DFSS, and I'm joined by my colleague Diana Salazar and Julia Talbot. Diana and I will be presenting today's webinar, and we will be available for questions. Because this is a joint collaboration with the Chicago Housing Authority, we do have our colleague Jessica from the Chicago Housing Authority who has joined us as well. And if we have questions related specifically to the CHA portion of the project, she will be able to chime in as needed. Today, I first want to go into a few housekeeping items. So there's a poll on your on the side panel of your screen. Just a quick informational question for you. So feel free to fill that in anytime during the webinar. Everyone on the call is on mute, so we're asking that you would please submit your questions via the chat panel. We are going to be presenting on 2 different program models that are part of this application, and so in between models we will pause to take questions specific to that model, and then we will do more general questions at the end of the webinar. So we will get to your questions if you enter them through the chat panel. So we'll go ahead and get started now. Yeah. No, you can keep going. So this RFP is the result of an investment in resources to address youth homelessness and homelessness among vulnerable families. Chicago has a plan to prevent and end homelessness, version 2.0 at this point, and that plan has a strong commitment to creating new, affordable, and supportive housing for households experiencing homelessness, and through our youth strategy, tripling the number of youth-specific beds in the housing system. This particular effort came to fruition, collaboration among a number of partners, including advocates, service providers, and our colleagues at the Chicago Housing Authority.
Good morning, my name is Diana Salazar. I'm going to cover the submission and project timeline. The proposal deadline is February 23rd, and it is due by noon, and that is a Tuesday. And it's due via CyberGrants. If you are already registered to CyberGrants, it should be easy for you to log in and use your login and password. If you have not, you can go to the link, and you'll find assistance via the link. Once they're submitted and we review and we choose who's going to be getting this RFP, we will submit the award letters out in early March. Agencies must be ready to begin their operations upon application. The general selection criteria could be found on the RFP on page 9 and 10. The 4 categories are programmatic experience and population needs, program design and performance, administrative, fiscal capacity and experience, and quality of proposed budget. Again, you can refer to page 9 and 10 for the 4 categories, and the total points allotted is 100 points. Now we'll talk about the CyberGrants overview. We won't spend much time today discussing the ins and outs of CyberGrants. Again, if you need help, go to the link, and you'll be able to find assistance and help questions and answers via the link.
Okay, so just an overview about the whole RFP. And before I get into that, I just want to note that in the chat panel, you'll see that we have 3 links that are just references for you. One is the link to CyberGrants, where again, as Diana mentioned, there are detailed instructions on how to register for a CyberGrants login, how to apply using CyberGrants, and then in that informational piece, there is a contact for technical assistance. If you do have further technical questions, you can reach out to them directly. We've also included a link to the CHA sponsor-based voucher application, and then a link to the program models chart, which we'll reference in our presentation. So those are just there in case you need to reference them during or after the webinar. So a little bit about the proposal. This proposal, again, will allocate up to $300,000. We're seeking multiple delegate agencies through this application, and this application is for services only. As we've noted, that this project is a collaboration with the Chicago Housing Authority. It's really kind of a two-part application. So the Chicago Housing Authority has, with their board's approval, committed up to 50 sponsor-based vouchers for youth and up to 50 vouchers for families. So this application for funding is specifically to provide services to the households living in those units through those pilots. So again, this piece of the application is just for services, and then agencies who are awarded through this RFP would move on to submit the application for the sponsor-based vouchers with Chicago Housing Authority. If you are, as part of this application, when you are applying, you're committing to applying for the sponsor-based vouchers through CHA, either directly or having a subcontracted partner, and you would need to be very clear about your plans to do that in the application. Again, this application has two parts. One is for transition-aged youth, and one is for vulnerable families. And if you're interested in applying for both special populations, you will need to submit two separate applications through cyber grants. They're very similar, but they are different. They do have different questions based on the service needs. So now we'll go a little bit into more detail about the transition-aged youth application. For this, our target population, again, is youth ages 18 to 24. We're targeting formerly homeless youth who are transitioning out of transitional housing programs for the homeless, or youth who are experiencing literal homelessness. Because Chicago's continuum of care is part of national efforts to create a coordinated access system for all housing services, we are going to be working with delegates selected to serve youth who are interested in targeting youth coming out of transitional housing programs. We will be working with this group to pilot the Youth Vulnerability Index tool to determine if there's a way to use that tool to identify system-wide youth who are ready to move on from transitional housing. So just know that that will be a piece of that, that service group. The Youth Vulnerability Index is a tool that was developed with housing providers, youth housing providers, advocates, and the Corporation for Supportive Housing to help identify youth who are more likely to become chronically homeless if there is no housing intervention to help them address their needs when they are at risk of homelessness and homeless. So our goal here really is to just see if there's a standardized way to determine who should move on to permanent supportive housing from transitional housing, but you will be able to refer youth from your transitional housing programs for that piece of the population. And then the second one is for youth experiencing literal homelessness. And in this, if you're planning to target that group, at this point your referrals must come from the central referral system, but we will also be working with All Chicago's HMIS team to get the Youth Vulnerability Index into HMIS so that we can then start taking referrals from HMIS using the Youth Vulnerability Index. And so I'll now get into a little bit of the key program elements. And as I mentioned earlier, the Chicago Continuum of Care has a program models chart which outlines the key elements and performance measures of various housing interventions that are funded in the city of Chicago that make up our system. So the permanent supportive housing component for transition-aged youth comes directly from that program model for transition-aged youth. This was developed, again, with service providers and advocates who are experts in youth-specific housing programs. Very broadly, the expectations are that your program is able to provide age and developmentally appropriate case management for this population, this age group. You need to be able to do an assessment of housing and service needs, to focus on creating positive connections with family members or other significant people if that's appropriate for the young person that you're serving. Really, we're looking for a focus on age-appropriate life skills and independent living skills and interpersonal skills training. Another key part of this model is helping to apply for and secure different benefits that young people might be eligible for. A big focus of this model is using the philosophies of harm reduction, positive youth development, and trauma-informed care. So that is something that we'll be looking for in applications. If you're proposing a model for youth transitioning from homelessness, from literal homelessness, having 24-hour on-site or on-call staff is part of this model. And again, because the young people will be moving into new housing, there's an expectation that you'll help them access different housing resources and supports, like getting their utilities turned on, helping with furnishings and things like that. The programs can be either project-based or scattered site. As for all of this, when you're working as part of the application with CHA, you'll need to talk about how you'll be able to locate units and landlords and kind of go through that application process for the sponsor-based units. That's the second part of the application process. And then we also expect that any program under this model will have landlord mediation services to help work with the young person and the landlord to teach them about their rights and then help to manage any conflicts that might come up during the time of services. The final piece here is also looking at a tool to evaluate an increase of life skills. That's a big part of our outcomes for this model. So the suggested tool is Ansel Casey, but any other evidence-based tool is acceptable. You just need to identify what the tool is. Again, for permanent supportive housing for youth, the idea is that there is not a time limit for this, for how long somebody can live in this type of housing. But we do expect that services are equipped to help youth prepare to transition to other permanent housing on their own timeline. So having an individualized plan with each young person is acceptable to do that. We're also looking for programs to have recreation, service learning, leadership development opportunities that youth can help to plan and participate in. And to link with educational resources, including if they're in school, McKinney-Vento homeless resources, and child-focused services if the young person does have where this specific application is for unaccompanied youth, but if they have children in their lives, that the program is equipped to help provide services if needed in that area. And then for all of these services, if you're not providing them in-house, just making sure that you have linkages to those services is another critical element. In terms of the performance measures that we're looking for, again, these came directly from the program models chart. And I won't go through them one by one, but they broadly focus on housing stability, so length of time that the household remains permanently housed or that they exit to permanent housing, maintaining and increasing income from all sources. So that means through benefits, through employment. We're looking, again, to help young people increase their connections and support system and increase their independent living skills. This last slide, again, is just around increasing income and through non-cash and cash benefits or employment. It's just the different breakdowns that we're going to be asking you to track for your outcomes in this program model. So at this point, we will just take a pause and go through any questions that have come through specifically to the youth program model. After Diana presents on the families model, go through family-specific questions and then any general RFP questions. Okay, so it looks like a few people have had some problems finding the link to cyber grants in the panel. This presentation will be posted on our DFSS website, so you'll be able to find it there. We will also be posting summaries to the questions that are asked, if I didn't mention that earlier. Okay, and then another question from David is just understanding that the total pool of funds for services for all projects selected is $300,000, and that's correct. We have $300,000 total to award for both family and youth projects. Okay, so we have another question from Nicole about their organization is interested in serving wards of the state who are emancipating from care. And I think, Nicole, we will need to get back to that question. We'll have to respond to that in our written responses. I think we need to just talk a little bit offline before we can respond to that question. So we'll make sure to respond to that in our written responses. The next question is around how many awards will be made from that $300,000. We do not have a set number of grants that we plan to award. We are interested in seeing the applications that come in, evaluating them, and awarding the best projects. So there isn't a target number of grants that we plan to award. And then Katie has asked a question about the grant timeline. And so that's listed in your RFP specifically. The awards will start on March 1st. And they will continue through the end of 2017. So you will not need to submit a new RFP. They will renew as long as performance and funding remains available. And Katie, I can't do the math that quickly, but it does go through the end of 2017. Okay. So now I'm going to have Diana move forward to talk about the family piece of the application. And again, we'll take questions after she's finished with this portion.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about families. Again, to reiterate what Maura said, this RFP is for 2 models, and she just covered the youth model. I'll be covering the families model. We're targeting families that are identified by the Frequent User Service Engagement, that's the FUSE program, and these are families that have multiple shelter stays who are at risk of discharge from a shelter. What we're looking to do is to prioritize the FUSE families. So that means that at this time, we're looking to receive referrals from the FUSE program. If at any point they are not available, then the referrals can come from the central referral system. Now I'm going to discuss key elements that we're looking for in terms of supportive services. The programs must inform their participants of their rights and responsibilities prior to enrollment into the program. The families model does not impose time limits. The housing must include subsidies, which could be funded by CHA, the sponsor-based voucher program. Programs can either be project-based or scattered sites, similar to the youth model. Projects should align with the dimensions of quality supportive housing approaches. And just like Mara explained, for the youth model, we're looking for a holistic approach which includes trauma-informed, strength-based, and harm reduction. We're looking for program models, we're looking for proposals to include assessment in the following areas, which is assessing housing barriers, setting up plans for housing retention, helping with health care benefits and income benefits, assisting clients with substance abuse and or mental health treatment, and also helping them with developmentally appropriate assessments and services for children in the household. Just like Mara explained for the youth model, the same thing goes for the family models. We're using the program models chart. So all these measures that you see in front of you on your screen could be found on the link that we provided, and again, it's on the chat. It's in the chat box, and it's the first thing that was posted. You can go to the link from there, and you will find these. These cover how long these cover how the percentages of the amount of clients we want to obtain cash benefits, non-cash benefits, both, how long we want them to remain in housing,
and how quickly households move into housing from the time of referral.
At this time, we want to take a pause here and discuss a couple things that were posted in the questions once you log into CyberGrants. The match question, when it comes to the budget, we are aware that on the questions at one point it requests a 10% match, and at another point it requests a 15% match. What we are asking the proposal to include is the 15% match. We're also aware that the facility assessment question may not be applicable to your agency. If it isn't applicable, complete the form as best as you can, and then we won't count points against you when reviewing your proposal.
So for the facility assessment, we just want to make the clarification that if you're asking for leasing dollars for office space, then we would ask you to put a facility assessment forward for your office space. If you are looking to secure a building and don't have site control yet, and your office space is going to be there, then you would do as Diana suggested and still upload the form and just note that you will do a facility assessment once you have site control. But this is not a question about doing housing inspections for the units. That will all be part of your process with the Chicago Housing Authority. I also just want to clarify, and we say this in the RFP, but the housing vouchers through the Chicago Housing Authority are not assumed or guaranteed once you finish this part of the proposal process. You do go through a process with them, and you have to meet all of their requirements in order to receive those vouchers. So once both parts of the proposal process are complete, you will be notified that you're ready to go. That being said, it is an eligible activity for the services funds to support a staff person who is responsible for, or whatever staff you need that are responsible for handling the work with the sponsor-based voucher applications. Great, so at this point we will go ahead and open it up for questions. This presentation is largely just an overview of what's included in the RFP, but we want to take that opportunity to answer any clarifying questions. Yeah.
Mary, if you wanted to say something, you're on right now. Mary Howard.
Hi, thanks. I just want to clarify, thanks Maura and everyone for having this and including that ours is a related yet separate process. We are working now at having an info session on February the 18th from 9 to 11. If there's a way for me to get everyone's info that's on this call, we'll be sure to send out invitations this week for that.
We can make sure that you get all the participants.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is around flexibility of selecting applicants from own programs who are homeless. And I think it's specific to the youth application, choosing from the first target population. You can refer, so for the first target population for youth, it is for youth who are transitioning from other transitional housing programs. So in that case, you definitely can refer youth from your own programs. We will just ask that you participate in this pilot for the Youth Vulnerability Index that we're working on, but at this point it doesn't preclude you from making those referrals. If you are going to be serving youth who are literally homeless and are not transitioning from another housing program, then they would need to come through the coordinated access process, which right now is the central referral system. The next question is around how the budget works. Is the grant amount for the first partial year and then again for the following years. You would be awarded an annual amount, and so for the first year, it likely will be prorated because the contract is starting March 1st as opposed to January 1st, and then you would receive an annual amount each subsequent year. So it is not $20,000 to $75,000 over the whole grant period. And then Katie is asking a question about the timeline on the RFP. I'm going to ask Julia to respond to that. I said 2017. Is that a typo or is that accurate?
That was let me look at this.
We're just looking up this piece on the application.
Oh, you know what? We have recently gotten permission to move to 2-year initial grants, and so no, if we provided that this program is funded, you will get an initial contract that runs for 2 years, which means that we would not just amend your contract after the first term. Mm-hmm. We would amend it after subsequent terms, provided that we have the money and that you are a contractor in good standing. So it's mostly just a logistical thing on our part, trying to cut down paperwork with the amendment process.
Okay. And then the next question is, what happens if you don't receive the CHA units? And unfortunately, if you don't, if you're not awarded the CHA units, then this funding, we will need to terminate your contract, and that's primarily because this service project is specifically for households that are housed with a sponsor-based voucher program, and if that happened, we would go to the next highest ranking application in our pool. And I do want to add that although it's 2 separate processes, we will be coordinating very closely with our colleagues at the Chicago Housing Authority and the selected entities, so you won't be left out on your own trying to navigate this. We'll try to be as as collaborative as possible throughout this process. The next question is around whether the housing single site or scattered site is through a master lease. And actually, it is a master lease with a sponsor-based unit. And Mary or Jessica, please clarify me if I misspeak. Can the housing be used as a match?
Can the housing be used as a match?
Mm-hmm.
Who's it funded?
It would be the CHA housing that would be the match.
Probably.
I think we're really looking for a service match.
I mean, generally,
in this application.
Speaking, when we say match, we're really looking for more a set of service match, or you can use pretty much every kind of match, any kind of match you want. My only hesitancy with the match from using the CHA housing match would be that sometimes you can't match federal dollars with federal dollars, especially if it's coming from the same place. And this would be two HUD-funded, most likely HUD-funded things. If CHA wanted to chime in on this, feel free. And so I would shy away from using that as a match. However, you can use, I mean, pretty much we accept almost anything as a match. So often people use the rent on their building or other operating expenses that that they receive from other sources as a match, or a leverage of support services and such.
Mary, you're on if you want to go ahead and say something.
Yeah, thanks. You're correct. No to the match on the housing unit.
Great. And Mary, while you're still on, there's a question about the rough timeline for applying with CHA for the sponsor-based vouchers.
Right. So our application is online now. Once the DFSS decisions are made and folks then submit the application to us, we're hoping to expedite that. As I've mentioned to some of you possibly before, I don't know who's on the call, but we do have an issue with needing to complete environmental reviews. It's a HUD requirement that we cannot waive even with our move to work authority. We are looking to see if there's ways to expedite that. So it's hard to guarantee the timeline, but we're committed to trying to do it as expeditiously as possible.
Great. So the next question is around, the next question says, in order to apply for this RFP, do you have to have vacancies at your project, or can this RFP go towards benefiting those already in your housing projects? So we are looking for new tenants, new clients. I guess I would need to defer to CHA about if the vouchers, if people can apply for to use vouchers for vacancies that they have in their own buildings.
So one of the things that we have in our guidelines is that you would not be able to use this to supplant housing that you already have and may lose funding for, or that you own. So that would likely be no. So if you owned a building and had vacancies and wanted to voucher it, then we wouldn't do a master lease with you as a sponsoring agency. You can look to our PRA program and putting in an application if you're looking at converting some housing to PRA, but otherwise this would be the way that we're looking at this along with services, is that these are new opportunities for transition age youth or the homeless families to get new housing. So it should be a gain to the system and not supplanting other funding.
And Mary, there's some other questions about, I think you maybe touched on this, but the deadline for the CHA projects and when the process begins and ends, it's a rolling application, correct?
That's correct. So it's a rolling application for those that are applying to DFSS. Once DFSS makes their determination on your application, if it's approved, you should submit your approval with our application. We're committed to expediting those, but then it really does depend on if you have units ready for our review and to get that environmental review done. Quite honestly and unfortunately, we have no idea how long this environmental review process is going to delay us.
And this is where I think the collaboration with the funded agencies and DFSS and CHA will be really important. I anticipate that we will get together and set some, target timeframes with the understanding that we need to monitor that environmental review process. Okay, so the next question is from James stating that it seems that partnerships would be ideal here. Is there a preference from your perspective? This is not a required component of our application, and so we just, if you feel that you can submit a strong application with a partnership, then we invite you to do that. But it's not a requirement or a preferred component. The next question is from Richard. The question is, if the agency doesn't already have housing space, they must secure housing space for the project, and that's correct. Again, you will be working with the Chicago Housing Authority to identify units and then have them go through the sponsor-based voucher process, and then this pool of money will help you provide services to youth or families in those units. Then the next question is from Jean about how we're defining transitional housing. I think this is fairly broad. The idea is that that we had talked to service partners who are interested in helping young people either step down from 2-year transitional housing programs that are either funded through the Runaway and Homeless Youth programs through Health and Human Services, or HUD 2-year transitional programs. But it's really so that's the kind of intended target population. So I think what we're interested in using this pilot with the Youth Vulnerability Index for is to help see if there's a need for, I think we've heard that there's a need for young people who need to step down to less intensive housing after a 2-year program, and also that there's young people who, after 2 years in transitional housing, still need intensive services. And so that's kind of what we want to dig a little deeper with that evaluation. The next question is from Nancy about whether it's possible for agencies to draw referrals from their own interim housing programs, and that's not possible. Again, our priority referral is for families who are engaged with the FAQs program, so they may be in your interim housing programs. And so the selected agencies will need to work with our delegate agency, Beacon Therapeutic, on establishing that referral process. And then if there are no referrals from the FAQs program, then we will be going with the central referral system at this point in time. Our primary focus here is to support the build out of the coordinated access system. Okay. So the next question, again, is from David about how you can begin the contracts March 1st if you don't know about the CHA approval. So as I mentioned, you can use service funding to support the activity of identifying and getting, applying through the sponsor-based voucher program. So that would probably be the primary service activity that you will use effective March 1st. Again, we will be working in collaboration with selected agencies and making modifications if it becomes necessary because of the timelines with the sponsor-based vouchers. The next question is whether master leasing is required, and I think Mary already touched on that. This question is specifically for scattered site models. The sponsor-based voucher program is essentially a master leasing project, and I think I would just encourage everyone when you get the link, if you can't see it right now on the chat screen, we will again post this online, but have everyone go ahead and take a look at that application. I think you'll get a lot of questions answered in that application. It spells out all the requirements, including the next question, which is, are the vouchers time limited with an end time? And Mary, I'm going to let you respond to that one.
Sure. So we're asking on our application, which can be found at our website, which for those of you that don't know, it's www.thecha.org. If you go on the development link, I believe it is the landlords. If you do landlords and then go to the property rental assistance program, you can find our application. But essentially, we're asking for a minimum of 2 years, a maximum of 7 with option to renew. So that's the stated timeline. Trying to just get a year-long master lease is probably not worth anyone's time to do. So that's why we're asking for a minimum of 2 years. Just to answer again around the question with scattered site. So scattered site units are absolutely fine. Basically, all your individual leases with respect to that roll into one master lease with the CHA. Unlike our regular project-based assistance that, excuse me, is with oftentimes a developer or owner, the difference here is that the social service agency becomes a sponsoring agency, and the housing assistance contract is actually with the agency, not with the landlord.
Okay. And then I think this is another question around whether we can, so the question is, can we apply for CHA sponsor-based vouchers without DFSS funding to house homeless youth? And this is in reference to, as Mary mentioned, there are 2 separate applications right now for sponsor-based vouchers. One is online and already accepting applications. Do you want to respond to that, Mary?
Sure. So the way that we will be doing this is that I know that we initially had 50 transition age youth vouchers out of the pool of what our board had approved. Because there was also concern about not having service dollars, we partnered with DFSS to do that. And so the first priority for the transition age youth vouchers will be through this process with the Department of Family and Support Services. That said, if at any time we have additional vouchers that we may consider, then that might be an option, but I would say that that won't be our first priority. Our first priority is through this process, and then we would take a look at if there are any remaining, but it's probably going to be unlikely.
And then the next question related to the housing units is whether CHA will provide the units.
No, we will not be providing the units.
So you'll be the selected agencies will be responsible for identifying units to go through the voucher process. And again, that's an allowable activity for the service funding. There's another question clarifying whether the $300,000 for services goes through 2017. And again, no, it's $300,000 each year, so it will renew each year. It's not for the length of the contract period. It will be prorated in 2016 because we're not starting until March, but every year there will be a pool, provided funding continues, there will be a pool of $300,000 for each contract year. So this, I guess, is a follow-up question. If you're interested in applying for CHA units without DFSS funds, you would submit 2 separate applications to CHA. Their application for units without DFSS funds is already online and available.
Laura?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I just want to reiterate: if you're interested in applying directly to CHA, and I would encourage you to come to the info session next week. But just bear in mind that then you would be taking from CHA's wait list.
Right, that's the main difference between the 2 applications. For this application, you follow the referral process from the homeless system that's outlined in this RFP. For the other one, it is through the CHA waitlist. The next question is the next question along the housing lines are whether private landlords are acceptable for the units, and that answer is yes. Another question around the total funding amount. So the total amount is $300,000 for both youth and families. It's not $300,000 for youth and $300,000 for families. We wish we had that total of $600,000, but it is $300,000 for both, and we will be kind of, again, taking a look at the budgets of the applications that come in. And then Nancy has asked a question about whether the service funding is capped at $3,000 per household, and that's a no. We did not specify a formula for you to apply for with this application. We are really looking at what applicants come in with as their needs to provide the services to the number of households they propose to serve. There's another question around what is meant by the quality of the budget, and that's really just looking at, are you proposing allowable activities that tie in, activities and staff that tie into the key program elements that you are expected to perform through this application? Did you meet your match requirement or exceed the match requirement? Just essentially, does the budget make sense in alignment with the number of people that you propose to serve and the RFP? Then there's another question around whether providers can bill Medicaid for services along with this grant. We definitely have partners who bill Medicaid as match for their projects. So I think that's possible. If you're awarded, we can connect you with members of our finance team to talk about that if you have any questions about how it relates to your grants with us. And then Monica has asked a question about, will FAQs services continue once clients are accepted into the program? And FAQs services can continue up to 3 months once a family is housed in a permanent supportive housing So the FAQs team is a multidisciplinary team that is engaging the whole family and helping them address whatever issues they identify that are challenging their housing stability. And so in theory, they would be partnering with you as a housing provider to work with the family to go through the housing process, and then we would just expect that there's a coordinated, warm handoff with the household. And I think just in terms of services best practices, the staff from the housing program and the FAQs team would work together with the household to determine when and how the services would transition. But FAQs technically, according to their scope, can continue up to 3 months post-housing. So the final questions right now are around whether you have to have a property before qualifying for the grant. For the services, no. For the sponsor-based voucher applications, you do need to indicate the units that you're interested in going through the voucher process. And that, again, is outlined in the sponsor-based voucher application on CHA's website. So there are a lot of questions about the CHA component of this project, and understandably so. So again, we will be posting the link to their application on our website in the question and answer response from today's session. And then we will also be posting information about the information session that CHA will be hosting on February 18th from 9 to 11 a.m. And we would just encourage you all to attend that to get your specific questions answered about that process. What's most important to know at this point, the relationship between the two processes is that for the units that are where services are funded by DFSS, CHA has asked that you do not apply for those sponsor-based voucher units until you have an award letter from DFSS. So at the point of award, then we will meet with selected agencies and Chicago Housing Authority to work out that next phase of the process. If you are applying for sponsor-based vouchers that come from the CHA waiting list and are applying for services through CHA, that application is already available and you can go through that process. Okay, so at this point, it looks like we've exhausted all of the questions. If you have further follow-up questions, you can feel free to contact me. My email address is on the last slide that's coming up, and it's also in the RFP. And then if you have general questions about contracting or the RFP process, you can contact my colleague Julia Talbot, and her information is in the RFP as well. So again, we will be posting the webinar recording on our website and a summary of questions and responses, and then some of the additional links that we had intended. We hoped that you would see in the webinar process, or we apologize for that minor technical difficulty. But thank you for participating, and we look forward to receiving applications.
Mary?
Mary, did you have a final comment?
No, I hit it by accident.
And that would be on the record too. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.